When Commencal released the Supreme V4, they had people questioning just how much difference a bike could really make. The V5 is as much a refinement of the V4 as it is an evolution. A large factor is lowering that pivot slightly, arguably making the bike a bit less of a plough, and also going to very progressive geometry with a high stack, long rear, and all the adjustment you could ask for.
So Matt, the Commencal Supreme V4, the last version, won just about everything and had privateers worldwide clamouring to buy one because it was the magic bike that was going to win you a World Cup. The V5 is a very different looking bike. Is it still that sort of thoroughbred racer? And is it still ominously fast?
Yeah, I mean, both of us came back after the first lap and we were extremely impressed. This
Absolutely.
thing was, it's very complex. It is not a single high pivot like the old bike. There's a 6-bar multi-link suspension design with 1,000 bolts. And we thought it might be a little noisy or creaky, but this thing is eerily silent,
Yeah, I mean, this bike performed incredibly well throughout the whole test. However, I think to really appreciate what they've done, whereas the V4, people just looked at the high pivot and said, there it is. This is death by 1,000 paper cuts. So how did this bike achieve such a great level of performance?
A tall order then, following in its predecessor's footsteps, almost as tall as that stack. But what's this World Cup winning bike like to ride?
Now, this bike has quite unbelievable grip.
Yeah.
But that's only half the story because it's also got great balance. For the viewer at home, can you just talk about what riding this bike was like and what you really enjoyed about it so much?
Well, I guess the first thing was just how both the wheels track the ground. Like just flutter over the small stuff. They push into the bigger holes. You know, the bike stays level and you feel very balanced and secure on the bike, even through flatter terrain or steeper terrain. And I was surprised at that because it kind of rode a little steeper than I thought.
Yeah.
And in some sense, the rear wheel actually pushes the front wheel on the ground.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, it was really strange. I thought that might be a little bit counterintuitive or like a little bit scary in some of the steeper holes and gnarlier terrain, but that's not the case,
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I just love the balance of this bike. And what was amazing is even though it's got that really high stack, how weighted the front wheel was. Mm-hmm. You mentioned there about, how both wheels gripped and how they both tracked and how did that happen? But that long chainstay just keeps that front wheel so planted. And at times this bike feels kind of sucked to the ground. It has a tremendous amount of grip.
Well, it has a tremendous amount of travel too, 220 mils. So 20 mils more than most downhill bikes.
Yeah.
That's a fair bit.
That is a fair bit. And I think there was something about it as well that I loved the compliance between the two axles. When you pushed into a turn, it felt like, it sounds a bit silly to say, but it just felt like you had more time and you could play with the grip in a way that you couldn't really with other bikes. That said, it never got to the point where it felt like it was wallowing or it was like a noodle as you push through. You just felt you could carve turns with so much precision and with such a weighted front. And when you think of a 220mm downhill bike, you don't necessarily think, oh, wow, that's going to be amazing to carve through kind of flatter bike park turns. But it's just so well balanced. When we think about the suspension feel, how would you describe it? Is it a bike that has lots of mid-stroke? Is it something that ramps up a ton? Has it got the small bump? Or is it just a blend of many characteristics?
Yeah, it had a bit of both, I would say, actually quite a bit of small bump compliance and forgiveness and a fair bit of travel. So you did have to kind of work the bike a little bit more, I would say, on the flatter terrain compared to at least the YT or the frameworks and even the Glory. So it did feel glued to the ground in a good sense, but it's probably not the poppiest bike out there, hey?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to be smashing laps of the bike park, in some ways it felt almost too sucked to the ground. But it really kind of thrived on that sort of classic racetrack. If you want to ride that old school downhill of sort of technical features of maybe slightly higher speed, it's got loads of balance and loads of grip. It also has a lot of adjustment. To some people, that might seem like all the options that they can get right. To other people, that might seem a bit overwhelming of all the options that they can get wrong. It's got chainstay, it's got a progression adjustment, it's got a flex adjustment.
Yeah.
Is there a geometry adjustment in there as well?
Yeah, so the lower shock mount has a fore and aft for progression, and then you can reverse that for high-low BB.
Is that a bit overwhelming for your just rider who just loves riding downhill that doesn't want to take out an engineering degree to learn how to work on their downhill bike?
Yeah, so there are a ton of adjustments, but the stock position that it arrived in did feel fairly well balanced and easy to get on with, well set up, has the small bump, has the bottom out. But there are more there, more adjustments.
There are so many adjustments. I mean, one of the ones that caught my eye was the flex adjustment, which isn't something we really had time to experiment with, but I've heard of some of their team riders running it without the bridge entirely. Now, I think what I think these 6 bars are really cool for is normally when you have a 4 bar, the rocker wants to give something very stiff for the shock to stop it binding or snagging. And similarly, the rear axle wants a great degree of compliance. And that's a lot for the stays to do. These 6 bars let you isolate the shock performance away from the wheel performance. And we've seen with, this latest generation of prototypes being ridden at the World Cups now, they're actually going to a steel chainstay.
Oh yeah, right.
And I think that sometimes like compliance and stiffness is something that's kind of overlooked in the bike industry. I think sometimes it's like stiff is always better, or then the compliant was better. And we've seen it with wheels, it's all pulling in all directions. But if you have a bike that blends the right amount of flex, it can really reward you with grip. And something like this, to me, had a great blend of compliance and a great balance of compliance between the front and rear of the bike.
On rare occasions, a bike rides so well, it's almost hard to fault. The Commencal blew us away with its performance, although its high grip, almost sucked to the floor feeling, might not exactly be what park riders are after. Can we find something to complain about in the specs of this incredible machine?
Now, this bike is not exactly cheap. It's not the most expensive on test, but sometimes I think people think of Commencal and they think of value. This bike is nearly $8,000. You get a lot of bearings and a lot of pivots, but that's still a lot of money to me.
And gold.
And gold. Oh, the poo brown brakes from TRP don't match with the gold on the rest of the bike. You've got the Fox gold, you've got the Commencal gold, and you've got the weird brown, and it's a strange mix. However, largely it's a sensible spec.
Yep.
It's kind of a mismatch. You've got TRP, Fox, SRAM, but it works really well. We did have a few issues with the wheels though.
Yeah, we noticed this was also on the Intense too. Some of the DT Swiss wheels, they come equipped with alloy nipples, which are great if you have that 4-sided hex key to fit over them. But if you just have a standard one, you're gonna round them out pretty quick. So you're probably not gonna find that special tool at the bottom of a bike park or on your multi-tool, or have it with you in your pocket. So just requires a bit more attention.
So this bike, like we said, has lots and lots and lots of pivots. It looks incredibly complex. But what was it like to maintain? Is everything easy to access and tighten? Was there anything that wobbled loose?
Yeah, I was surprised. I did a lot of bolt checks on this because there are a lot of bolts and we were hammering this bike, and it does flex more. So that puts a little more stress on all those bolts, and everything stayed nice and tight, quiet. It was really surprising.
This bike might not be for everyone, if only because it feels like a downhill thoroughbred, with all the high maintenance that goes with that. There are more pivots, nuts and bolts in this bike than your favourite childhood Meccano set. So who's this bike for?
So when we think about who the Commencal's for, to me I'm thinking people that love that sort of classic racetrack where they're really looking for just a huge amount of grip and confidence at high speed. But who wouldn't be a good candidate for a bike like the Supreme?
Would say someone who's doing more free riding, a park rat. They prefer jumps over tech. They want to carry speed. Commencal does have that Furious, which is totally built for that, and doesn't have a 29-inch front wheel. It doesn't have a long chainstay. It's not glued to the ground. That'd be the bike, and the Supreme would be better off in the hands of a racer, hey?
And if there's one thing that park rats hate, it's bolt checks. So, honestly, get them on the way in and the way out. It's a win-win.
Just weld them shut.
Yeah.
When it boils down to it, this bike is amazing when it comes to delivering grip and balance, and everything you could want from a race bike in 2024. That said, some racers will be disappointed it can't take a full 29er setup, even if it's clearly fast enough without. What are this bike's pros and cons?
So Matt, kind of an easy task here. What are the strengths of the Commencal?
It goes where you point it and the wheels stay on the ground. It's really well balanced under braking, turning, like the wheels just, the chassis stays exactly where you want it. It's predictable. It's beautiful, but are there any downsides?
Honestly, it's such a good bike. Yeah. We were both blown away. I think if we were being really picky, if there is such a thing as too much grip, the Commencal probably has it. If you wanted something that's like poppy and lively. But honestly, this is just an amazingly consistent, predictable bike. And if you don't like that, it's not for you. I don't know, really.
The Commencal Supreme is just that, supreme. Whether it's balance, grip or comfort, there isn't really anything this bike doesn't give you. That said, for those that want a downhill bike to give them confidence, but also a way to pop and play with the trail, they'll probably wish they had something with a little bit less of a focus on race performance.